in my new role as the Executive Director of the Creston Valley Chamber of Commerce. Woo! I'm very excited about that. Along all the things, I volunteer for not-for-profits. I pivoted my business in 2020 to fortify my food distribution portion, which is Root and Vine Mercantile. And in the Creston Valley, we've been super lucky not to experience directly a lot of the emergencies the basin has faced. Emergency prep is top of mind for me as a community builder, right down to being the daughter of a firefighter. So it's we're gonna get real serious here for a bit, I think, best I can. That's me. That's why I think I should be up here asking questions. Now, let's talk about who's up here. Who's gonna be first? It's gonna be Kendall. Corporate businesswoman turned accidental farmer, as it said in her slide. I took that from that earlier today. Farmers market, online sales, marketing, CSAs, subscriptions, farm store. I'm really excited about this subscription business, so thank you for that. I started following Kendall after her talk at FABx in Invermere 2 years ago, and my favorite thing to hear about her in circles where her name is mentioned is, damn, she's smart. Next up, we've got Chris, emergency management consultant with over 25 years of experience. In 2020, he started Clear Sky Consulting to support communities across Western Canada. In his time with the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary, Chris navigated several emergencies and events that we're talking about today. We're talking wildfire, landslides, flooding, severe events, hazardous materials spills, to name a few. We won't get into it too much. We can say he knows a thing or two when it comes to being a lifelong public safety professional. Had the opportunity to meet Chris leading up to today, and his welcoming, practical approach to preparedness made me feel like this heavy subject can be tackled piece by piece, and his follow-up with links and information was extensive. I've collected many links, supports, worksheets that I want to share with everyone here. So you have to give me your email for that. And I've put my notebook on the side here with my pen. I'm going to leave it there for the rest of the afternoon. Please put your name down. I will share all the resources I've gathered from these cool cats on the stage. Next up, Mandy, food business coach, boss babe extraordinaire, local food cheerleader, moving to the Kootenays from Ottawa with her sweetheart Chris in 2020.
Move to a town you've never been to?
Yeah, just pick up and
never seen it,
leave the big city and come to the Kootenays. Good choice, right?
I think so too.
Not only is she busy as an independent food and beverage advisor, she curates the annual Kootenay Coffee Fest, which was last weekend, and is the only reason I knew that Chairlift was a Fernie roasting company, and got me some coffee to take home. Thank you. She curated Kootenay Teen Chef Club, which is now spreading to the Northwest Territories, 4 communities, she said earlier, supporting youth with food education. And if I can have anything to do with it, and Kip, who's in here somewhere, that'll be in Creston in 2025. Awesome. She's also vice president of the chamber, no big deal. And Andrea, executive director of Community Future Central Kootenay for 11 years. Awesome. Before that, CBT director of communications. And before that, she was on the dark side in the corporate world as Boston Pizza's director of regional marketing, right? International something. She's in the right space now. I've had the pleasure of working with and for Andrea for the last 3 years, and I can't say enough good things about her ability to lead a team and support our local businesses. So with that, I am going to get right into the questions. I gave them the questions ahead of time, so we're not going to put them on the spot too much, don't worry. Chris, first, we have wildfire, crop failure on the top of our minds as we come out of this wild summer. Can you please give us an overview of a few other emergencies and scenarios that have impacted our region and our food systems?
Yeah.
Oop. Yes, no?
Hello. Okay, that's better. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Jessica, for the question, and thanks, everyone, for being here. There's lots of different hazards that affect communities here in the Southeast, and we really break them down into two different categories, human-caused incidents and naturally occurring hazards. Obviously, wildfires, one of our big ones, if not the biggest by a long stretch, but we have parts of our region that are really affected by flooding events as well. Different kinds of flooding, stormwater flooding, pluvial flooding, but, based on severe weather events and rain on snow events and things like that. On the human cause side, we look at a lot of things like food security. We look at things like transportation route disruptions, electrical system disruptions that, folks obviously here in this region are very familiar with. I do a lot of risk assessments for small communities, and we look at 60 different hazards. I used to make fun of things like space weather, but has anybody noticed the northern lights the last 6 months? So I've stopped making fun of that. So yeah, but there's lots of different things that we have to consider, and we always think about what the hazard is, what the risk it presents to our businesses or our communities, and then what the vulnerabilities are. And then we really try and work on things that reduce that risk and vulnerability. So, thanks.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add to that extensive list?
I'll chime in.
Oh, yeah. Get it.
Thanks, Chris. So something you're going to hear me talk a lot about during this panel is the importance of a business continuity plan, which I often will say people are about as interested in writing a continuity plan as they are in writing their will, but it's probably just as important. So just want to share with you on our Community Futures website, we have a template for a continuity plan, which is exactly what it sounds like, how to make sure you can continue to operate your business in the face of an economic interruption. And we'll have a table tomorrow afternoon at the trade show where we'll have a sample of it you can take a look at, but just really encourage you to check that out. And on there is a list of all those risks, and you can go through and assess, what risks am I at the greatest likelihood of facing, what's gonna have the greatest impact to my business, and then it's going to encourage you to come up with a plan B if you're ever in that situation.
Thank you. So we've got an idea of the potential emergencies and scenarios that might exist here. Kendall, can you describe some of the different types of business disruptions you've experienced, both as a farmer and in food distribution?
I mean, it's extensive. I farm in the Fraser Valley, so if you remember, we had some pretty extensive flooding that shut us off from the rest of the country. As a rancher in Rock Creek and a farmer in Langley, I was actually completely removed from my other property that has livestock, so that was a pretty significant one. It cut off access to abattoirs for us. Avian influenza has caused massive problems in my area with slaughter access and things like that. I mean, wildfires in the areas of Rock Creek. And then even outside of what we think of as like a natural disaster or an impact that has like a regional, even things like medical disruptions within my family has caused as a family farm. I think oftentimes we think about like the forest fire and the things like that, but I actually went into cardiac failure in one of our fields with our bulls, which was a really unique challenge when the ambulance arrived and they weren't sure they actually wanted to come in to try to help me because I had a little tour of bulls going around me, and what did that look like within our business as somebody who really operationally runs our business. So I think it's always important to kind of keep that in mind too, is you may not be hit by one of the big things that impacts you and all your neighbors. It's when it even hits just within your own farming operation or your own food operation. How do we handle those kinds of emergencies as well?
Yeah, exactly. Mandy, same question. Tell us your experience coming from a bakery owner and a food business coach.
The story that I really like to tell is how important it is just to sit down, list out scenarios, and empower the people who work for you and work around you to implement those procedures. I had an emergency procedure guide that was the subject of much mockery of my staff. And when I say emergency procedure guide, I'm talking about 5 little pages. It outlined every scenario and exactly what the staff were supposed to do. 10 years ago this week, thanks creepy social media reminders, I was about 3 hours outside of Ottawa in beautiful Picton, Ontario, where my family is, buying apples to make some pies. And my phone started going off, but I was driving, and then I noticed my dad was calling me, and I was like, uh-oh, I don't have a dad that calls me, really. And when I answered, my father kept asking me over and over where my partner, Chris, was, who was a photojournalist at the time. And it came out in a series of events that there was an active shooter in Parliament that day. He had just murdered the young man guarding the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. He was now in Parliament, which was 4 blocks from my bakery. So by the time I called my staff, and just to show you guys, because I used to go to talks and stuff and be like, yeah, I'm sure you had a guide. If you would like to read it, you can. This is the guide. So by the time I did actually find my staff, here it is. This is one the staff always, what does that say? Does that say terrorism?
Sure does.
It does say, and the staff, my staff made fun of me for years. But by the time I got a hold of them that day, they were working, and they knew that they were free to lock up and leave because they did not feel safe while leaving a note on the door. So kind of just having all of these things in place and empowering the people around you to be safe and comfortable. You never know. I thought I never ever saw that coming. Just I worked in the service industry during September 11th, and I remember the pandemonium that was going on during that time because I was so close to a major Canadian city. So that's why I included it in there. But if you would like to see this, I'm going to have it with me for the next few days. So it's nothing fancy.
Thank you. Yeah, share that.
We're gonna share the mic. To add into that terrorism piece, because we oftentimes don't think about that as being Canadians and living in the country that we do. From a supply chain management perspective, if you are somebody who does trade with the US, I have been a logistics coordinator as an operations manager with US offices through the Boston bombing, through 9/11. When the borders shut down, what happens in our country, if you are an exporting producer, really what's going on south of us has a very big impact. So we also have to consider the emergencies that happen south of the border and the political climate there as well.
Thank you. Excellent point. Andrea, from your work in emergency resilience, business supports with community futures, look at this wording. Thank you, AI. Do you have anything to add on the line of business disruptions within our community that you may have worked with most recently?
So do you mean
Disruptions that we haven't talked about yet. Anything?
So again, referencing my business continuity plan, some things that it made top of mind for me are things like hazardous material spill, which, Slocan Valley 10 years ago, that happened. So the kind of thing you don't think is going to happen or impact you can. When we started offering business continuity plan training in 2018, pandemic was on the list, and it was one of those ones we kind of giggled about. And soon enough, it was very relevant. I think another example is a couple years ago when the Rogers network went down and all of a sudden nobody could take payments, their debit machines were down. So again, it's thinking about all these potential scenarios, how they would impact your businesses. And as we heard from Kendall this morning, have multiple revenue streams and way to get your product or service in or out that you can pivot to.
Thank you. Okay, so we've kind of set the scene for the emergencies that exist and the events that have happened, could happen, might happen, are happening to our food businesses in the region. Having a conversation with Alice Ford at Ravine Creek not too long ago, she was not in the evacuation area with her farm, though it impacted her greatly. They had stopped going to the farmers market in Nelson, if you know them from there, have their fantastic farm stand, do their CSAs. As a result of the impact to people traveling or in the area, she had to go back to farmers market. She had to change her whole sales situation backwards, and never thought that that would be what it is. So with that and those edges, for anyone, what other unexpected challenges do food businesses encounter during emergencies that we're not thinking about yet? Yeah, Chris, get it.
Yeah, okay. When we do our risk assessments, one of the things we talk a lot about are compounding or cascading events, right? So I'll give you an example. When we think about things like hazardous material spills or railway accidents or something like that, we also think about things like explosions or environmental impact and things like that, and like the event that Andrea mentioned. And those things are important because it's not necessarily the wildfire that impacts a community or a business or a group of individuals. It can be things like the loss of an entire tourism season, right? If 90% of your income comes from a 3-month window in the summer and you miss that window, then it's not just those 3 months, it's the entirety of the year until we get back into that cycle and can start generating income again. We look at things like wildfires, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room are familiar with this. After a wildfire, the land's ability to retain the snow and the water from precipitation is greatly diminished. So after we've had a wildfire, we always think about things like the flood risk is probably greatly increased in the spring during freshet. So that's something we'll be watching for the Slocan Valley. We also worry about things like debris flows or the ability of the highways and the roadways, the culverts and bridges and things like that, which are always aging infrastructure, to be able to sort of convey those materials as well. And I'll give you an example. So when the Ministry of Transportation now replaces a 30-inch culvert, they replace it with two 60-inch culverts, to adapt for climate change and to prepare for events like this. So it's always about thinking about not just what the hazards are, or the risks that we face, but what's coming after those facts as well. So,
Thank you. Kendall.
And as a livestock producer, I have to be really, really aware of what comes after a natural disaster. When we had the flooding that we had in the Lower Mainland, that resulted in contaminated earth that happened because we were flooding out, we weren't, but in the region that was happening, it was flooding out chicken barns. There's a lot of large-scale producers in the Lower Mainland, so we had contaminated waterways, we had contaminated ground, but we also had a lot of farms that lost their feed source, so their hay, their silage, and all of that, which then put strain on our farms, right? Like, I may have not been in the direct impact of the flooding, but not only were we cut off from the rest of the country, but all of a sudden the feed supply in the Lower Mainland became really, really depressed because all of a sudden farms like mine were stepping up and saying, hey, I know you lost all your hay and here we're going to help you. But then what does that do for the farms like ours? So there really is a big cascading effect. And when you've got livestock, there just isn't even an option. Like, we have to continue to be able to feed our animals. We have to be able to have that continuation of care. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into it as a livestock producer to make sure that we're covered and that our animals are properly cared for through emergencies as well. It's not just us. And it's not just how are we going to get our products into the hands of our consumers. It's how are we going to make sure our animals are safe as well, because I owe them that.
Mandy, you had shared a story with me about coolers, blackouts, Quebec. Please share with everybody else.
So up until about 2018, for some reason, and I would have never ever believed this, Ottawa completely became Tornado Alley around 2017, 2018. I'd lived in Ottawa since 2002. It was just wild. All of a sudden, we were having tornadoes every single autumn. They were getting really close to the city's core. And at this point, I had closed up shop and I was advising. So when the first really big tornado came through, it kicked out power for the whole city. Never mind if you were out in the valley. And the city of Ottawa limits are massive. It takes 90 minutes to drive from one end of the city limit to the other. It's huge. So we were out for over a week in the core, but the thing about downtown Ottawa is we're right on the Quebec border. So there's Hull, and Quebec has their own power grid. So I was finding my client with ice cream and calling the Quebec folks with ice cream. I was finding my client who was doing a bunch of aged meats and sourcing fridges, and we all kind of started teaming up, and you know how there's like twin cities where you have a twin city? I always say to my clients now, especially when you're at events like this, find somebody who has similar production needs to you, somebody who has similar storage needs to you, somebody who is ideally on a different electrical grid, and make them your pal. And the understanding is that if you do need support from that person, you can go to that person and you can support each other if you ever do find yourself in that kind of emergency. My client who made ice cream, like we just made it. We just, this is like goat cheese, goat milk ice creams. Like we just squeaked over there. But I think that opportunities like the one we're all sitting in today to make those friends and find those folks, you should take them. I also wanted to add really quickly, if anybody in the crowd is writing their emergency guide, if you have a friend with an anxiety disorder like I do, this is their time to shine. Ask them for all the horrible scenarios and all the horrible scenarios and then those horrible scenarios. Like this is, I always say to my clients, this is your benefit, my superpower.
Real-time risk assessment.
Right? Yeah.
So I want to ask, in hindsight, what was the hardest lesson learned, and how has it changed your operations? And I'm going to pose it to Kendall because she told me a story about her buddy farm, much like you're saying.
Yeah, so this segues perfectly. It's almost like we planned this in advance. When it comes from a farming standpoint, I encourage any farmers to find a buddy farm, preferably not super close to you. As a livestock producer, I need to know that I can evacuate livestock. I know it's not always a perfect solution. I know that takes time when you've got a herd the size of mine, but having a buddy farm where you know you can take livestock there in the event of an emergency, and they know that they can take livestock to you in the event of an emergency. My needs are fairly large. We're a little bit of a unique situation because we do have the farm in Langley and the ranch in Rock Creek. We are each other's buddy system as long as we can get trailers into the area fast enough to evacuate. But I do also have connection points that I have made through situations like this where they know they can come to my ranch or my farm and that we'll have the ability. I also make sure that I invest in infrastructure that is mobile, whether that is Gallagher electric fencing, whether that anything that I can have on hand to be able to pop up pastures for other producers, or so that I can throw it into the back of a truck and pop up somewhere else. Just having some sort of plan for facilitating extraction of animals and livestock is really, really important. You don't want to be caught in the situation where all of a sudden you're just, for the very first time, trying to figure out what you're going to do in the event of an evacuation.
I might just add, Andrea and I talk a lot about business continuity planning with the folks that we talk to, and quite often say, is this a good time to talk about business continuity planning? And they'll say no. And we'll say, is there a better time to talk about it? And they'll say no. A lot of people don't have time for this, right? And we understand it. I'm a business owner too. I mean, I was saying to Jessica, ask me where my grab and go bag is. Like, I know where all the stuff is, I just don't have it all together. But, I think the key is all of this stuff can be broken down into little tiny pieces. And, if you take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour a week to think about, when was the last time I looked at my insurance? Or, would the firefighters know where our water supplies on our farm are? Or, I wonder if the provincial government has a program for reimbursing people for moving livestock and things like that, right? If you just take a little bit of time, there's lots of resources online. I always say there's nobody that wants a time machine more than somebody who's just gone through a disaster and wants to go back like a day and do a whole bunch of prep work. So just take it a little bit at a time, and that makes a big difference in the long run. It doesn't have to be, a big formal thing. It's just spending a little bit of time with it.
Could just be a pink duotang.
Absolutely.
So with examples and maybe associated investment, both in time or money, what role does technology play in emergency preparedness? Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, you go.
I'll start it off. You need to be prepared for it to work and be prepared for it to not work. So if you're suddenly evacuated, you want to have all your important financial information saved in the cloud online that you can access from anywhere you may have to go to. At the same time, you have to be prepared that the internet may go down, electricity may go down, so you also need a hard copy of it. So that's where I'll start the conversation off.
And those specific examples of those documents, we're talking insurance documents, we're talking employee documents, we're talking inventory, we're talking how do you start a claim, where's your, registration for your business? Go, Kendall, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I have all that stuff sitting in Google Drive. I also have hard copies of it. Was that something that happened overnight? Certainly not. And it came from not having it. I find that the kick in the pants that's often needed is realizing that you don't have the things in place that you need to have in place. Case in point, when I went into cardiac failure in the field, and then I was in the hospital for about 7 to 10 days, we just realized that even at that point, there's so much within my company that exists inside my head, and it was only me that was handling it. It was only me that was uploading the online store. So even if it wasn't that we wanted to continue business during that time as a family, we couldn't even stop the business. The orders continued to come in while I was in intensive care, which is fine. We have a big enough team at that time.
Fine.
I mean, it was fine. We still needed the money. We still needed, we've got employees. My entire family's employed by the farm. But had it been a smaller operation at that time, it definitely and certainly would not have been okay. So what ended up stemming from that is I got home and my husband said lovingly to me, I don't even have the password to log into our online banking. And I hadn't really even thought of that part, is that all of these things that existed only inside of my head really needed to be put on paper. So that spurred for me, we got a program called Scribe. We sat down and I went through button click by button click, how to stop our store, how to upload a product, how to do all of the things that only I know how to do. That program is an AI tech program, so it actually takes the keystrokes to which you're doing, so it really didn't take a big time commitment for us. I just went through the processes that existed on our computer because that administrative end is really a big part for me, and it created training manuals, standard operating procedures inside of my company while I was working anyways. So it didn't take a big onset of time, but it did certainly open my eyes to the fact that having some standard operating procedures within our business was important when most of it lives inside of my brain. Because that's 7 to 10 days as orders were still going through, as Ranch Club, that subscription was still processing, all of those things. All of a sudden, if it had been worse than it was, how would my family have even known how to undo the subscriptions, undo the credit cards processing? All of that we became very aware of what the rest of the team did not know through that emergency.
I'll just add maybe one really quick real-world example, not related to businesses, but more from a municipal standpoint. Everybody I'm here, I'm sure, is familiar what's gone on in Lytton over the last few years and the devastating fire they had. Part of what's made that recovery so difficult in that community is that the village of Lytton didn't have anything stored off-site. So they had things sort of in the cloud. They had paper records of a lot of things, public works documents, maps, their tax records, all the decisions that their mayor and council had made over the last however many years were either stored as paper records on site or on a server on site. And when the building burned down, they didn't have any records of anything that had gone on in that community. So at that point, they're trying to build back from scratch, right? Start from nothing. And, if you've got these things somewhere, like who remembers their Revenue Canada business number? I don't, right? I have to have it written down somewhere and it's in the cloud so that I know that I can start from somewhere else in BC, somewhere with some of that information to start with, so.
Not only that, thinking about those that are evacuated, will they come back? So you're not just starting from scratch with your community, you're starting from less than scratch. So how can communities be better prepared to support their neighbors in crisis? Earlier, when the Fireweed Hub was talking, they were talking about access to a food hub where food preservation can exist. All of a sudden, you're in a situation where you cannot sell your fresh product. What then? Where does that happen? What are some suggestions in terms of community building that we can support each other in?
Everything to do with my business, my emergency preparedness all comes down to relationship building. So a big part of that is having a really good relationship with the suppliers and the vendors and the people that I work with, the feed store, the processing facilities, all of those different organizations. I know this is going to sound silly, but a Starbucks gift card or a local gift card for a coffee shop can go a long way. And a lot of times, especially in animal agriculture, the people that I need the most in order to be able to get my product to market, especially in an emergency like COVID, when all of a sudden the processing facilities were working at half staff, when avian influenza happens and suddenly the hatcheries don't want to even acknowledge a farm of my size, they're really focused on the large farms. Having appreciation for the people who go underappreciated in the agriculture sector and doing it year round, not just popping up with a gift card in an emergency, but popping up with that real appreciation for the people who catch my birds, the people who haul my birds, the people who get me my chicks, that process my livestock, that cut my meat. That goes a really long way. The feed operators, when I showed up during COVID and the feed store told me I could take 10 bags, like I can't negotiate with my birds on how much they eat. This isn't an option. Like I don't get to just go home and get like, sorry guys, we only got 10 bags. And so when I left there, I got a phone call and they said, I heard you were just in, come on back. And it's because of those relationships that I had spent time cultivating and really making sure that I'm throwing back that appreciation through the year. That way in an emergency, they've got my back too.
So I do some work with an agri and food processing group up in Northwest Territories, and I was invited up to the Culinary Festival in Yellowknife this year. And on the farm bus tour, I'm not going to go into a lot of the stories because some of them are just extremely triggering, but the evacuation of Yellowknife and how close the fire did get to the city is very much, very, very fresh in people's minds. But the good side of things that I did hear about were things like farmers who had to leave or evacuate, the people who did choose to stay, and some of the first responders were even taking care of the farms and watering things and checking out stuff. Some of the urban farms in Yellowknife proper put up signs saying, please take what you need, because nobody knew when they were going to be able to get back. If you want to hear some of the stories, you can find me later. I'm not going to tell a lot of them here because some of them are really triggering, and even right now I'm feeling really upset. But it was really the community building around that and the way that folks did support each other. When the grocery stores were emptying out, the farmers and the community all came together, and it was really, really special.
Chris, yeah, hand it to him, but I'm also going to ask him. At lunch, you were mentioning, similar to this in those terms of community supports around mental health and people's talking about this. Can you speak to that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'll go all TMI here. And, a lot of people in the emergency management industry know that this kind of work, whether it's, emergency management or police, fire, ambulance, dispatch, search and rescue, it comes at a cost, right? There's a cost of being involved in those kinds of responses. In an emergency management, it's kind of weird because we're the people, if you think about a disaster, the emergency operations center is like the brain, and then the responders out in the field are like the hands. They're doing the things. But the people at the EOC, the emergency operations center, are making decisions with not enough information, not enough time. They're running on like 4 hours of sleep, right? They've probably been going for 3 weeks. So it definitely comes at a cost. And I was a big part of the Grand Forks 2018 flood. Evacuated 3,000 people, and we had damage to 450 homes. And I know some people in the crowd were there as well, and played a very pivotal role in that. And a lot of us, after that event, we're helpers, right? We want to try and help, and when you can't help as much as you want to because of the systems in place or the nature of the disaster, it takes a really profound effect on you, right? So I think, when we think about the people that are helping, the people that are affected, the people that are evacuated, there's a weight that comes with being associated with any of these kinds of events. And I would say, definitely there's lots of resources out there. They're not always the easiest to find, but, if anybody wants to know more about that, come talk to me afterwards. But we definitely need to take the time, to sort of deal with the things that we go through, make sure that we're being very kind to the people that we talk to, because everybody's situation is different and everybody deals with things differently. We want to make sure that, that we meet people where they're at. After the flood in Grand Forks, sometimes we would talk to people 9 months later and they weren't able to process what they had been through. They hadn't been back in their homes. And so when we think about recovery, and there's always this push to have the recovery completed really quickly because the focus goes elsewhere, we want to make sure that, we're just being very aware and cognizant of the things that people are going through and how we can support them. I think that's a really key piece. And yeah, and we just really need to build more systems to support people. And yeah, I'm sure Andrea will speak to this as well. There's not always a lot of support for business owners, agricultural producers, and folks like that. There's so much focus on residents and taxpayers and things like that, but there's more work that needs to be done on the business side as well. So,
Thank you, Chris. Andrea, tell us about the supports that are available for businesses to prepare for as well as recover from an emergency. And add to that, how are we going to balance immediate emergency response with resilience planning for the future? We're already hustling.
Okay, I'm going to try to remember.
How do we add more?
I'm going to try to remember all of that, Jessica. So through the Community Futures Network, there's 34 Community Futures offices across BC. And one of the benefits of that is that we're very connected to other rural communities in BC. So we've been hearing over the last 10 years about the impacts in Grand Forks when there was flooding, about the fires in Lillooet, about, you know, what the businesses went through there, what they wish they had done before. So I had the benefit of learning from my colleagues around the province and bringing that information back to our communities. So in terms of preparation, I'll say it one more time. Think about your business, have that continuity plan in place. The other thing is thinking about how you can be prepared as a community and thinking of the business community. Have your chamber manager, like our Creston chamber manager, make sure they have relationships in place with the people that are going to be in the emergency operations center so they can be feeding that information into the center, such as, you know, people need to get into their property to water their plants, and vice versa. The EOC can share information back to the businesses. So make sure from a community perspective you have those relationships in place. And then what other supports are available in terms of recovery? So again, because so many businesses in BC have been impacted by natural disasters in the last 5-10 years, the Community Futures Network of BC has a program in place to help regions that have been impacted. And as a result of the wildfires that took place in the Slocan Valley and the Lardo this summer, the Regional District of Central Kootenay has been added to those regions and now has access to those benefits. So again, if you come see us at our table tomorrow afternoon, if you go to a website, it's mycommunityfuturesbc.ca. On that website, businesses, any business in the RDCK can access free access to workshops, consulting, and one of the really nice pieces is training fee reimbursement, so up to $5,000 in reimbursement for training you've taken related to your business, and it can be as far back as 2022 or needs to be completed by this upcoming December. So that's kind of a nice way we can get money in people's pockets. So those are some of the supports that are available. And then what was the other question, Jen?
Yeah. What was my other question? Because I'm already thinking about the next one. Thanks for that.
I thought of one more thing I was going to add.
Balancing immediate emergency response with long-term resilience planning.
Thank you. The other thing I can mention is as a result of the wildfires we saw in our community this summer, we did put in place a business recovery loan that is available to businesses. So the business recovery loan has a streamlined application process. It can be loans for up to $20,000, up to 6 months of no payments, and that's for businesses that have been impacted by the wildfires. And it can be a direct impact and indirect impact. You know, we heard about you lose your tourism season, your business has been impacted by a wildfire, even if there wasn't a fire burning next door. So that's another support we have available. Nice. And in terms of what can we do as part of immediate recovery and future recovery, all tied together?
Sure. I feel like you answered it, but let's keep going.
Well, again, I go back to Kendall's presentation this morning. And, you know, when you're faced with that emergency, it is a chance to maybe pivot or pilot that idea that you've kind of had in the back of your mind of, could this be another revenue stream for my business? go for it and try it out. And if it's successful, it's something you can keep in your wheelhouse. And the example I often think of is Alligator Pie Catering in Nelson. During the pandemic, boom, all their catering gigs are gone. So they started selling online freezer meals that you could order once a week and pick up. And now they continue to do that. So they've added another revenue stream to their business. So I think that was an immediate response that has made them even more resilient long term.
Thank you. Exactly. So 7 minutes and 27 seconds left here. I'm going to go into a question and answer, but I'm going to mix it up a little bit and do it backwards. And that there's a few in the audience that I've had conversations with around this topic or are in some of the pieces of food businesses that aren't directly reflected in this panel. So I'm going to put Beth from Viva Cacao on the spot, no big deal. Can you speak to anything that we're talking about because of your food production and ordering? Yeah, of course you can. Tell me. Tell us.
Okay. Yes. I was thinking about what Andrea was just saying about the loan and the kind of things that you have to think about that you need to know about your business in order to even like apply for a loan like that. So something like understanding exactly what is the revenue that you've lost and do you understand enough, do you have a grasp of all of those kind of pieces for the month that you're out, or how long is the after effect of it? Another thing is understanding your insurance, and they did a lovely reel talking about this, just understanding what does your insurance cover and what do you need to have. So one thing I learned was to go around and take a video of everything you have, and that's like the easiest way to document it, and then you don't have to do pictures, you can just do a video real quick right before you are evacuated. So that was a really helpful piece. And having insurance is a pretty big one. Like, make sure you have enough insurance. So the first time I was evacuated, it was the first time. So I was luckily that time I was only evacuated for 24 hours, but it was a really good wake-up call because I realized that my insurance didn't cover anywhere near what my inventory was. So I hadn't been keeping on top of my business growth and the amount of inventory I had, and so I was like, I don't even have close to enough to cover what I have right now. So that was a big wake-up call to increase my coverage, and so to keep on track of that like every year, that kind of thing. I think I'll leave it.
So bad, but so good. Thank you. Yes. No. Kendall mentioned emergencies that might happen outside of our country and what that does to our import-export. So I'm going to ask Michael to make a comment for us in your experience with Export Navigator. Can't say the words. Here you go.
Hi, folks. Michael, Export Navigator. Hi, Chris. Oh gosh, it's an endless list. But before I go there, I just want to add to the topic of insurance. Whoever's in the room, try to get your insurance renewal period out of the summer. Get it into the spring, get it into the late fall, because once the renewal period is, and there's a fire, you can't switch provider, you can't negotiate, you can't up the coverage, you can't do any of that, right? So just get it out of the summer. Yes.
Hot tip.
What's that? Well, so what you do at the next renewal, you say, hey, I want to just get the insurance for 6 months till February or whatever, and then you're covered for 6 months, and then in February is your renewal period, and then you can tour around and get competitive bids and upgrades to the insurance and that kind of stuff. I like you nodding.
That's all you get? That's all you get. That's all you get. That's all we get right now. You can talk to him more. I also experienced exactly what he's talking about with insurance because I was getting home insurance after renewing my mortgage on my farm in, when was the cheese festival? May? April, May? And the insurance broker was so stressed out. She said, it feels like August already. So February, maybe December. That's it. Shauna's got the big hook, and she is making me stop talking. I want to thank you for listening to this really intense conversation. I want to thank you guys for getting up here. I want to thank Shauna and Damon for working so darn hard. I know she can't wait for Sunday. And one of the best things about this event is the networking that exists. And you're in a room with people who have experience. Ron LeBlanc, Nairi, everyone. I could just name all of you literally right now. Have these conversations with each other, listen to each other's horror stories, and take those little examples, like Michael said, and take them to heart and do them. Do it. Do it. Okay, bye.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys are amazing. Thank you all so much.